slick and then people drive with their hazards because they...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's those people are keeping me in business, though.
Yeah. Very true. I always think you're actually making the roads more dangerous because of it.
Yeah.
You're ready to bring everything? Yep.
Yes. Are we ready?
Yep.
So you call the meeting to order.
Yep, okay. All right, so, let's see. Time is now 10:41 a.m. on January 11th, 2022, and I'd like to call this meeting the Small Business Advisory Commission to order. The first thing we want to do is look at the approval of the minutes.
Absolutely. We'll take roll call.
Okay, roll call, okay. So who actually does roll call?
I'll do roll call.
Okay.
So, District 3, Judy Canales.
I'm here.
District 4, Juanita Sepulveda.
Here?
District 5, Vicky Willoughby. District 6, Rick Camfu.
Present.
District 7, Katie Siriakos.
Present.
District 8, Sarah Shaquille.
Present.
District 9, Jeremy Roberts.
Here.
District 10, Jim Hollerback.
Here.
Mayoral, Julissa Cariello.
Here?
Chair, we do not have a quorum due to lack of quorum physically present.
Okay. First thing we'd like to do is talk about the minutes. Those were distributed on January 7th by Ms. Diaz. She distributed out to the commission the minutes for November 17, November 29, and December the 4th. For the SBAC, did everybody receive those first? Because I think that was our first formal communication out to the commission with those minutes. Yes? Anybody online have any problems with that? No? Okay. Were there any corrections to those minutes? Was there anything that we saw that needed to be amended to that?
There are some corrections.
Okay.
Just editing things of that nature. But due to the fact that we do not meet physical quorum, they cannot be voted on.
Okay.
So they are to be carried over to the next meeting.
That works.
Do we table?
Yeah, we can do that.
So if you have corrections, could you please provide them? We will.
Okay. So with that, with the corrections for the minutes, we will push that over to the next meeting. Now it's actually like to open the floor to public comments. If there's any individuals that have signed up to speak. Yes.
In addressing the following minutes, noting that the minutes for December the 4th, 2021, and the following, November the 29th, and November the 17th are to be tabled and carried over to the next.
Correct.
Well, we don't have a quorum, so we just can't take action on them. So just, they're to be on record there.
On record, yeah. We can't officially.
Right. Can we ask what happened to December 17th minutes? They're just not, they weren't ready in time for this agenda. So we can present them at the next meeting. Thank you.
So I guess no public comments?
We have no one signed up.
Okay, so I'd like to, let's see, move over to the agenda items. The first one is the small business definition. I believe the city might have something with regard to what the SBA defines as a small business. That's going to give us a foundation for our conversation.
Morning, everybody attending in person, virtually again. Anna Bradshaw, Assistant Director, Economic Development. So wanted to have just to give a brief presentation today on the definition of small business. I know this is a topic that's come up at several of these meetings. And really understanding, why is this important as we go forward? But first and foremost, it's developing that shared understanding of what existing definitions are out there. So in addition to, requirements we've had with our program, the SBA has a definition, and it's really throughout government, it's defined a little bit different, but also using those existing definitions and understanding that those typically provide an upper limit, but understanding, what are the other challenges that exist at each stage of the small business journey, and taking that and understanding how it can influence the development of programs moving forward. So again, while it provides an upper limit, we may choose to target someone at an earlier stage and may adjust based on those definitions. So just to kick us off, SBA's definition of a small business. So for most entities, it's either companies with 500 employees or fewer, or non-manufacturing businesses with average annual receipts of under $7.5 million. So SBA uses their methodology to determine whether you use revenue or number of employees based on the expected revenue associated with it. So in areas where you have high costs, they may actually use the employee standard. So think of heavy manufacturing where you have high cost input, or you're a distributor, you may receive a lot of revenue, but that may actually not reflect the amount that's hitting your books. They would use the employee standard. Whereas consulting would use the revenue standard because of the lower cost of those inputs. And again, this provides a maximum that can be eligible for SBA programs as well as federal contracting programs. Other SBA requirements are that it be a for-profit industry, independently owned and operated, be physically located in the United States, and you'll see the other general requirements on the slide. And again, this is SBA's definition. Other definitions of small business that you can find out there, generally the structure, the legal structure can dictate whether it's considered a small business. If they're organized as an LLC, or it's another way of considering what is a small business. As well as within the Affordable Care Act, there's a definition of a small business having fewer than 50 employees. Now, looking at a few other definitions within SBA, so you have, you can be considered a disadvantaged business, being publicly owned and has at least 51% of its ownership by one or more individuals who come from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. So again, that's another definition out there. When you look at emerging small businesses, again, a subset of small businesses within SBA. So no more than, or having no greater than 50% of the size standard, the applicable size standard from the SBA definition will qualify you as an emerging small business. And then within our SBATA ordinance, we take that one step further and being no greater than 25% of the SBA standard. So again, it's just a smaller subset of a small business definition. And then micro businesses. So this is a relatively newer one. So SBA defines it as having 1 to 9 employees. However, if you look across various entities, it's going to vary greatly in terms of those standards from state to state, entity to entity. And so how have we applied these definitions in the past? So again, within our recovery grants program, we capped it at a maximum of 20 employees. So that was our definition of micro business at the time, and going all the way down towards those self-proprietors. And then with our hospitality grants, understanding that hospitality industries tend to employ more part-time employees, the cap was actually allowed up to the SBA max of $8 million in revenue for that grouping, with allowing an unlimited number of employees, again, understanding the part-time nature of a lot of hospitality work. So that's just a brief discussion, our presentation on small business definitions. Here to answer any questions or turn it back over to the chair.
Yeah, I guess let me open the floor to the commission for other questions.
So for clarification, these are the standards that we're going to be measuring our businesses by?
No, this was part of going back to really even as most recent as our December 17th meeting, the discussion came up of, well, what does small business mean? If different entities rate it differently, and this was just, again, to start that conversation of what are the definitions that are out there, and how can we look to leverage those definitions as we design programs moving forward. So again, it was just start to build that shared understanding and start the discussion.
Are you done, Wendy? Anna, thank you for sharing that. If you'll go back to your slide, this was interesting to me here, right? Because we know that the SBA size standards they vary, the small business definition varies depending on the industry that's being put out there. So I think I have a really hard time saying a small business is only so many number of employees when we know that every industry was impacted differently, right? My main concern is identifying a starting point of how many businesses do we have in San Antonio first, how many small businesses do we have, and you know, can we define it somehow where it's easy for us to review, to have a starting point, because we need to be able to measure, are they improving or are they getting worse? Are we losing more? Are we starting more? What is really happening? And I would really like to hear from staff as to what do you use as your starting point? What do you know of how many businesses we have in San Antonio that you say this is how many we work with?
So,
one of the things, go for it.
So let me ask, see if I understand your question before the question's answered. You're asking for definition of the structure according to small business. As per SBA?
I'm asking, per SBA size standards, how many small businesses does San Antonio have that we know of?
Per structure definition of SBA or
Per SBA size standards.
okay. I wanted clarification, but I thought.
So there's a number of different resources out there that do have data on small businesses. The challenge with a lot of those data sources is they lag. So they're a year, 18 months, in some cases even 2 years behind. So there's been that challenge of kind of getting real-time data. So that's something that we're working on. The city has in the past contracted with Dr. Niven, somebody that you may have worked with. I believe the last time was 2015, for a little bit of a more in-depth analysis on small businesses. We are launching a strategic plan initiative. The consultants should be approved. We're presenting them to City Council in February with the anticipated launch of that strategic plan in March. And as part of that, there is a data analysis, an update, so to speak. So we're going to be working with those consultants on a little bit deeper dive in some of the data. And then we've mentioned previously that there's going to be a lot of stakeholder engagement as part of that. So we'll want to be working with SBAC on identifying stakeholder groups that we should be meeting with. That's something that we've been starting to pull together because that's going to be a very early conversation, so that we can, again, we can look at the data that's out there, but we're interested in what's on the streets right now, right? What's the actual information out there?
I think if you say, even if the data was active as of 2 years ago, what was that number?
Yeah, sure. We can pull that information. I'm sorry.
So we don't know the number.
Is there an opportunity to maybe form a subcommittee that can work with y'all to look at that?
As far as
Just to help out, just to have some extra eyes on it, just to support that. Just that way you have some visibility.
well, why don't we pull the numbers for you so you can take a look at it?
But is it 30,000, 50,000?
The last number I saw was 37,000. 37,000.
And that was as of when?
So I pulled that, it would have been in December, I think, or was it November?
November.
Late last year, we pulled it, and it was last year was 2021, so I believe it was 2018 data. So again, it was pre-COVID, it was interesting, but it didn't really, the conversation that I pulled it for was the COVID impact, and it wasn't, unfortunately, very helpful.
And so I'm wondering if again, I go back to what Councilman Perry talked about, the 38% that shut down. that's over 13,000 businesses if you compare it to that 37,000. And what industries and, you know, do we have any data that we can say this is what we know so that we're creating something that's hitting a need?
Yeah, so what we're pulling together is, because we also need to understand historical, right? We know in restaurants there's a lot of churn, even in the best of times, there's churn. So one of what we're putting these lists together of the type of data, what we want to understand, so what we can pull internally. But then again, we do have this strategic planning process that we're going to be undertaking in March. And so as part of that, there's an outline of data small businesses is certainly highlighted in there. And so there's tools and resources that those consultants, again, yet to be determined, so I have to be careful what I say, but we're anticipating that those consultants that are selected will have an array of data and subscription tools and a variety of things that we may not have accessible to us. So we'll be pulling that information as well, so that, again, we're all working off the same baseline.
So one of the things I've been asked by the city is that we cannot go into further deeper discussion without a full quorum. So
Right, but this is talking about the site.
Correct. I think with that, what we can do is just kind of cover information to where we'd like to see for the next one and have that information prepared, but we can't go into deep discussion to be able to come out with a decision.
I think my concern is I just want to make sure my concern is clear.
Sure.
That it's not about us just saying, here's the site standard that sounds good, but that it's based on something that is real. And again, if the Councilman Perry has talked about, there's a number out there, can we grab that data to look at it and say, what is he talking about? And that study is going to talk about those businesses that are more in-person type service that are impacted.
Yeah. I'd like to have that data for our next meeting. That way, let's push to have a full quorum. And that way we can have a deep discussion with that data so that we can look at it. Because at the end of the day, we're making guesses on the types of businesses that are being affected. I think one of the things that interests me is there are businesses that are out there looking for bids for the city, looking for business, looking for help. I'm curious to what type of businesses are actually doing that and which ones are just off the edge and have no clue of what they're doing and they need help. And that's where we then allocate our help. But we don't know anything. We don't know what we don't know.
I would also like to see that since this committee is being built and we're expecting it to go on forever, that we're having some kind of measurement that we say, are we improving? Are our businesses growing?
We're making gut decisions. We don't have a baseline or foundation to work from.
Right.
And so for us, there's actually no upper and lower control limit to work from. And so right now, we're just throwing it out of left field based on hearsay.
Thank you.
Which is not exciting.
Right.
And so it freaks me out to think we're just making decisions, but obviously we can't make any decisions today.
Right.
But
well, and this wasn't a decision. So I think one of the items that we wanted to highlight with this is there's a number of definitions out there, but again, you can determine how, as you're looking at funding and different mechanisms, you may identify different audiences based on the information depending upon the program. So you might look at it more as a portfolio and addressing different needs throughout that portfolio.
But we have limited funds.
Well, we don't know how many funds we'll have exactly. No.
yeah, and I think for me, because then the program will dictate who needs the most work.
Right.
And so on.
Or what would bring the biggest impact?
Exactly. Ms. Bella, you got a question?
I do. And you're right. We're not here to make a decision. We're just here to discuss definition as presented, because that was actually brought up by Mr. Tatu. And what I was hoping is that we would hone in. What I was hoping is by this person that we would hone in what the city is defining as we move forward to discuss, not determine right now, how we're going to be able to recognize funds for small businesses. That was the understanding, and that's what I've gotten. But when I am asking for further discussion It's based on this 38% that was presented by the city in the November city council meeting. It's based on that 38% of small business. What is the definition that identified that 38%, and what were the structures of that 38% that's being reflected?
Is that data that we can have?
So that was data provided by a city council member that, we have requested for background on that and are still working on getting that information. It's not something that we've necessarily been able to track down ourselves or replicate, so we're working with the council members on this.
But Brenda, that's my concern. It was presented in an open forum for city council reflecting 38% without identifying the structure by the
Hi, everyone on the WebEx. Are you able to hear me at least?
I am.
Okay, so we just
Yes,
lost.
Christina, thank you.
Whoever's got the phone number that's listed on there, ends with 35, that had been going in and out, and you can hear the sound. It was distracting.
I agree. I was thinking it might be within the conference room though, like it might be the line for the folks in person.
I can hear the beep, beep, beep of the trucks outside, so maybe that's it.
Hey, we can have our own meeting. Did I hear clearly there's no quorum? Did I catch that? It was kind of
Correct.
muffled.
No, there's no quorum, so it's a discussion meeting. So.
Yeah.
And truly, we can't have any prolonged discussions without a quorum either. It's just strictly supposed to be staff briefing and questions to staff if you have questions to ask of
Okay,
staff.
good.
Sure, Christina. Remember, we started the first two meetings at least with no quorum, at least. So
Correct.
no, we get that part. But thank you. Yeah.
I'm skimming through the Next Street study that was done in late 2020 to see what they used.
Katie, the number was there. It was there in that report.
Yeah, is it 50 or fewer?
38,000 businesses, something.
Yep, that's
We
right.
can hear
7,
you
like
now.
what Anna said.
That's right.
Thank you.
What did she say, Scott?
Cool.
Excuse me.
All right, so I guess where we left off was the fact that there was data presented in a city council session, but that data has yet to be available to staff and also to the commission, just because the district that data was presented from doesn't have a full report that they can give out.
Right.
So that is something that we're seeking. It's glaring data, so it's something that we're seeking.
I know that, because you mentioned 37,000 businesses from 2 years ago, right? I'm looking at one here that was provided by Alex Lopez. That was a study from 2015, and it was 36,400. So it seems to be within that same range. So even if we say ballpark, there's about 37,000 businesses, right? The breakdown of these businesses, if I can share, because I think it's important that we look at the structure.
Well, and we can update this information as well. I mean, if you want to, but just for discussion, even if we say there's.
Well, we can't have full discussion today. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's just for understanding.
Okay.
it's not really to vote on anything, but if we can at least look at
Well, I guess from what I was told is that we're allowed to talk about things that we want to prepare for and have ready for the next meeting, but we can't have a deep dive discussion because we don't have quorum.
my only concern, this is our starting point of what's going to be what we base everything on.
I completely agree.
Legal ones.
Yeah, go for it.
Chair, thanks. I just wanted to clarify. That's correct. We cannot have prolonged discussion at all. Briefings are strictly for members to maybe ask staff questions, but there shouldn't be discussion between members just to comply with Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
I would like to add in. So I think part of the data gathering process should include that Next Street study. When our audio cut out briefly, we were talking about it. And that was the study that was published in late 2020. And that includes some figures. I'm looking at some tables on pages 11 and 12 of that study that includes some figures on percentages of micro businesses, percentages, say 49% are micro businesses of the 34,000. There are some key fields, right, like retail, hospitality, estimated percentages of the 34,000 businesses that are in those key fields. So I think that should be a data point for us as well. And I also have a request. I understand that this definition process will continue. And then on a parallel track, it sounds like there's going to be a strategic planning process that's being undergone by EDD. So I would love at the next meeting to have an update on the proposed timeline for that strategic planning process and any deadlines associated with requests for soliciting feedback from our stakeholders in our respective districts. Sorry for all the throat clearing.
No problem. And I think one of the things that's going to be enlightening is in our next session, we're supposed to have Layla Powell present.
Oh, good.
To SBAC, and I think that let's do what we can to have a quorum in that one. That way we can follow up with full discussion in that, and we'd be able to have the data. But I think for now, if there are requests to staff and to the commission from each of the individuals from the different districts, I think that would be the best way to do it without having a full discussion. So let's go ahead and start with, let's see, what we got? Let's see, we don't have D2 here yet, no D3? Ms. Canales, do you have a request for our information to pull for our next discussion?
Oh, thank you. You caught me on that one. I was,
No problem.
What happens is that we don't see it, so it's kind of hard to, I'm like, okay.
Right.
So what was it? One more time on the question, please.
Sure. So because we don't have a quorum this session, we have to wait to have a full discussion on the data that's available. So I'd like to see if you have a request for a specific type of data or something that we need to be considering as we have those discussions, especially with Layla Powell presenting in our next session.
Well, I think what would have been something that I worked on was on the data piece was looking at the council districts, and I think just we were hearing this point about Councilman Perry, putting some data out there. I'm always curious regarding the council districts in San Antonio and seeing what would be the number of small businesses in each council district. I think that would be kind of interesting. And I also appreciate the getting even more honed into the micro business, which there's a lot more in San Antonio that meets the eye. And so I think that is something that will probably also see some changes as per COVID because of the fact that people were starting business even during the COVID timeframe. So I think as much up-to-date data as possible would be fantastic for us. Thank you.
Sure, and just to cover that again, so it's what's the number of small businesses by district, and then we could maybe then look into a further breakdown of the type of small businesses, because that would then further our discussion on the definition. Because I think
It does, and it's very real. It's a lot more realistic when you get into the reality of folks who are, frankly, they started their business and they're working from home still.
Yeah, I think one thing to note is even a business that I work for is a majority of the people that you would think are full-time are now 1099. And so, yeah, they're not considered full-time employees, but you've got 80% of your staff as 1099. And that's how it's changed with COVID. So, yeah, I think it would be interesting. I think that's great data. Let's move to Ms. Sepulveda.
I'm just wanting clarification on that 38% and really the source that it came from and what is being defined in that 38% of the structure that reflects that. In other words, the definition that you gave on it was that we've got hospitality, we've got the micros, we've got, what was the other one? The size standards, how they're defined, they're for-profit, independently owned, and they're dominating, basically, are they in the hospitality industry, are they in the construction industry? You know, how are they structured and identified by SBA? Because there's been a lot of reference towards SBA. And if we are leaning more towards SBA, what are we, as a city, defining small businesses? So that way, when small businesses come to us, there's a clear-cut understanding where they're going to be categorized. Like when we do our solicitation, we have our annual report, it says other, or it has engineering and architecture, we have staffing or services and goods. Those are structured, right? And we have a clearer definition. That's what we were, from my understanding, that was the definition and the structures that we were abiding by.
Well, so those categories are defined in our Subcommittee ordinance as the categories. So the reason why we reported, I wanted to discuss the SBA definition is that it's one that's defined. So I think one of the things that I've learned especially is that there's a general inconsistency in the definitions being used. And, hindsight being 2020, even with some of our programs, I think I would look to recommend that they be anchored to an existing definition. So that way, as a business, whatever field they're in progresses, we can show, okay, at this point they are no longer considered small based on our definition of this. So I would strongly caution against creating new definitions at this point, but rather understanding what's out there and understanding, perhaps if we're designing a program and we say, no, we don't want to target those larger small businesses, if we're going to take, again, a restaurant, those really close to the $8 million threshold, we want to target those at 1/4 of that, up to $2 million, and say it's a grant program. Right. But again, we've anchored to an existing definition as opposed to just saying $2 million. I think it just creates more consistency, more clarity, so that we can track progress over time as opposed to saying, well, why did we do it that way for this program and this way for this program? It creates that structure and organization that I think help us show the impact being made and really tell that story.
I agree. That way we have a clear-cut picture of what it is that we're complying to.
Okay. You good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Ms. Willoughby, is she on? Okay. Mr. Tom Fu. Can you hear us? Hey, Rick. Tom Fu. Can you hear us? I think you're on mute. It's the word of 2020. You're at the beach, I know. That's why. You have a cold bath.
Oh, sorry, I was talking on mute.
Ah, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess for you, a data request or something to have prepared so we can be ready for our next discussion.
Okay, that's good. I will.
Was there any piece of information that you were looking for request?
Not quite. After listening to all the different statements on small business description or definition, I believe that it's going to be very difficult for us to have a unified definition, but we might just have a set of description of what we will consider a small business in San Antonio, either based on industry, based on size, or based on revenue, and make sure that all these parameters are captured in our overall repository of small businesses, or what they should be described as.
I agree. And it's also hard for us to allocate programs to various types of small businesses if we have no idea what the data is, because we're then guessing. Okay. Mr. Arcos?
Sorry, I was trying to keep myself on mute so that I wouldn't be coughing and whatnot. Yeah, I think having the Next Street study factor into the future discussions, I think is a salient and recent data point we should include. I think beyond that, I'm looking forward to hearing from Layla next time and incorporating her perspective into our conversation.
Okay, and just curious, when you say recent, and I want to make sure we get this definition for people, when we talk about that, are we talking about the 2015 study? Are we talking about the 2020, 2019, or how far back do we need to go?
You mean for Next Street's work specifically?
Yeah, I mean, just for us to start pulling data, if we have data available.
I think to Brenda's point about COVID and how that's, significantly impacted our small business community, I think pulling information from the last 3 to 5 years is probably the best we'll be able to do.
Okay. I like that. Okay, let's see, Ms. Shaquille.
I think everyone said I echo everything. I just think we need to drill down more on the numbers and then attach them to definitions. Existing definitions would be our best bet, so we have a consistent reason for why we're allocating this to. And it shows City Council that, we've done our research, and have proof, we have numbers.
We're coming to the table with data.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think also to that point, I think it'd be interesting to also use the existing SBA definitions, but also to identify new up-and-coming definitions that could be potentially used, because there's so many new types of small businesses that have been created because of the pandemic, and I think we have to be cognizant of that. All right, Mr. Hollaback.
My turn. All right. I have a question, actually a three-part question, and it's going back to some of the slides that we just saw, and these may just be micro questions because it's dealing with micro business, but who makes a decision on the grant amounts on these particular ones? I'm just curious. I want the thought process, if you will. And using what data, and then how many of those grants were actually given out or awarded?
So I think it's one of those things that it should be based on the data, right? And then the second thing is that we need to help identify how those grants are being pushed. I think that's part of the mandate of our commission. And then the data, that's what we need to find. We have no clue what it is. So I think it'd be nice to maybe even look back at existing contracts. I think it'd be nice go for it.
I don't see how, I look at some of the dollar amounts here, and there's, for instance, just coming from a business owner, right? Hospitality grants, 1 to 10 employees, $20,000. That doesn't cover one payroll period for 10 employees. It's not a lot of money. And anyway, just my point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because there's two approaches. There's the one that we take our years, we have probably almost 500 years of experience in this room, right? And we take all that experience and we use gut feel and we think, oh yeah, this is how it should be. Or we take the second approach of saying, here's what the data is telling us, and then we use our experience to be able to say this is not right because.
So if I may, Chair, on the previous two grant programs, those amounts were determined by staff. Again, I guess the challenge with that, hindsight being 2020, and full disclosure, before I joined the department, but was, the time involved. It was these dollars were available. We wanted to activate them as quickly as possible. And so it was, looking at other, what other organizations are doing, working with our partner Lift Fund to determine, how could we do it. I think in hindsight, we maybe ran the risk of spreading the peanut butter a little too thin, and as opposed to trying to, determine a different criteria, whether it's covering actual losses, so we're helping those businesses who were hardest hit. So I think there's a lot to be learned in how we did this first round of grants if we are going to consider that moving forward in terms of how are we impacting those who have been hardest hit moving forward, because again, I think with grants, we're at a point where we need to be as targeted as possible. Going back to that discussion we had previously, the difference between grants and loans. With grants really needing to be targeted because those can have an impact. So trying to avoid the spreading the peanut butter a little too thin again is a major lesson learned here, and looking at what best practices are out there at this point.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for the explanation.
Ms. Cadena? Yep.
I think I would agree with a lot of the stuff that's being said, right? I do like having the data shown by district, by council district. I also think that it needs to be, after that, it needs to go by industry and then by number of employees so that we know how many micro businesses are there. And I love the idea of using the SBA size standard because we want to see are our companies growing as you're updating these surveys or studies that you're doing, Brenda, is going to actually help us identify that. I also like the idea of identifying separately startups in the same council, number of employees and everything. Are they new businesses for that year that we need to know how many new ones are starting so that we can identify how many have we lost every year, right? That needs to be identified.
And I'd be curious too of also how they're set up, because people are getting new and creative ways of how they're setting up new businesses.
Right.
Is it a sole proprietorship, LLC, and so on?
Well, they register, and so
Yeah.
do we have a partnership to identify and get a list of how many businesses registered? I mean, I don't know what the city has for that. Or
Through the SBA, they have to. You can see what kind of corporation they are, S corp or
Well, if they register to do work for the federal government, they will.
No, I'm talking about what database is that? There's a database that public has access to where you can see. I'm gonna have to find.
There is. You look up Texas
Yeah.
corporations,
Yeah.
and you can actually look up any Texas corporation based on either a number or a keyword.
Yeah.
That's why I look for names. If I'm going to build
Yeah.
something, I look for a name.
Maybe a presentation from SBA presenting the numbers that they're tracking because they're here locally too. I mean, they must know how many businesses are in San Antonio, how many are new, how many are different types of industries. I don't know if that's a possibility.
Yeah, we can certainly reach out to them. So this is an inherent challenge across the country, across the globe, and a lot of places on getting accurate small business data because you don't, like a lot of municipalities, we don't require businesses to register to do business in a community, right? They might get permits, there's things, but if they're not registered to do business with the city, we may or may not know about the nail salon or the restaurant, and even sometimes permits are challenging because it might be under 123 Main Street LLC that got some of the permits and you don't know that that's what kind of restaurant it is, or, so this is something that there's been national committees on this, but there are certain data that we can, again, I think, pull and provide you with so that you can see the breadth of the data that is available and start to get into, again, some of these different data sources. And the SBA definitely has a list. The U.S. Census Bureau, again, that's one of the recognized resources available. There's a number of other subscription services that take data then, all of these sources, and try to kind of conglomerate it all together. So that's something that we will definitely pull and bring forward so that we can at least provide what we have available to us. And again, knowing that this is a challenge, that is something that we've specifically have identified, that small business piece in the strategic planning request or proposal. So we'll know more at the next meeting about what, hopefully at the next meeting, but start to dig into that at future meetings about what some of that might look like as well, and then continue to work with everyone.
And like I said, because this is on discussion, I just want to make sure you're finished. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a question?
So, in one of those resources, are we looking to our own county where we're, even if you're not LLC or corporations or sole proprietor, are we looking at pulling the DBA? Because even at the Secretary of State level, they highly recommend we do DBA.
It's highly recommended, but we found in economic development across the state and across the country that just because it's recommended, a lot of businesses don't do that. So, again, that was a requirement for a lot of organizations as they were applying for the different CARES Act across, again, having been on a group that was involved in kind of doing some note sharing about the CARES Act grants and best practices and whatnot. That was an inherent challenge that I would say in the community I was working in at the time, probably 50% of the businesses that were applying for CARES Act grants did not have their DBA, and we were requiring it, so we had to work with them on getting it. I don't know, what the experience was here locally, but so again, it's all data that we can certainly try, get, but recognizing that there's inherent challenges with a lot of it, for sure.
And I have the feeling that we're not going to get all the data that we need. There's not going to be a silver bullet document that's going to teach us everything. It's going to be fragmented pieces of information, so we're going to have to look and see.
Piecemeal it together.
Yes, we will. Yeah. And my thought is, even if we have to form something in the next session, a subcommittee that specifically analyzes that data and then presents it back to the commission, that would be pretty interesting to actually put together. So I guess since we can't do anything today with regard to that subcommittee, I would say keep that in mind. And if you do have an interest in that, I think it would be nice to form a specific subcommittee that goes in there as like a task force that specifically looks at the data to analyze that. That way we don't have to spend our time specifically in this meeting, everybody looking at the data firsthand. Let's see. All right, so with that, can we close on the SBA part? Pretty good? Okay, so next item on the agenda is a loan interest buy-down program. And just so for the purpose of this is all also educational for us to have a common understanding of what this program is. So that way, when we do have conversation and discussion in the next meeting, we're able to all speak to the same level of information.
Exactly, and actually, we just presented this to the Education and Workforce Development Council Subcommittee yesterday, so got some interesting feedback and thoughts from them on this program, but one of the things we specifically told them was that we would be presenting this to SBAC because I think as we'll go through and I'll highlight, I think we have challenges with outreach and marketing associated with this program, so definitely interested in hearing thoughts from the Commission on how we can improve that to ensure that our small business owners have access to this program, because it truly is, I think, one of the most impactful programs we operate as a city. And not advanced. So, loan interest buy-down, we operate in partnership with Lift Fund. They have been our partner since the beginning of this program in 2016. So, we're going into a year of the program. And as a CDFI, Lift works with those traditionally that don't have access to normal commercial lending. So, they work very closely with those small business owners, not only in getting them the financing and access to flexible capital that they need, but also things like credit repair and financial education, so that eventually at some point they can graduate to those more traditional lenders, and the benefits that go along with that. So this program helps those small minority and women-owned businesses expand their business by providing the capital, like I said, to purchase property, inventory, equipment, and improve their location. So it provides, the city covers the interest on loans between $500 and $50,000 for those who apply, and annually we have a budget of $250,000 for this program. Typically, we exhaust that funding within 6 months. So last year, we had very low spending in the first quarter of our fiscal year, and then from between January and July, we spent the bulk of the funding. I believe we had about $20,000 left for the fourth quarter of our fiscal year. So funding is generally exhausted in the program. And so here is a breakout of loans by council district for the life of the program. So a total of 161 loans have been provided, and you'll see that distribution with the bulk of them going into council districts 1 and 2. And again, as I mentioned, what this kind of highlights to me is perhaps a challenge with marketing the program. So I'll go over some of the outreach and marketing strategies that we've used working with LIFT, but I'm definitely interested in getting feedback to understand how can we reach those individuals, perhaps in council districts 3 and 4? What other challenges does the commission think might be causing this kind of blip in the data where we're seeing a larger number going into council districts 1 and 2? And so this slide provides a distribution of those loans by dollar amount. So the darker blue bar is the actual dollars in loans that go, and then the more teal bar is the interest covered by the city through this program. So again, it pretty much aligns with the previous slide in terms of percentages where the dollars are going. And then as we dig into the demographics of the program, so 81% of the loans have gone to minority-owned businesses. And throughout the time, we've seen 40% of those loans go to women-owned businesses, with 7% going to veterans, and then you'll see those jobs created and retained. So we do have some great metrics associated with this program. Now, one of the things council challenged us to do yesterday was to look at, the long-term impact of the program, and so this is something we're going to be working with LIFT on this year to go back and survey those businesses, because those businesses who initially had their interest bought down in 2016, have they paid off their loan? Have they, sought traditional lending, kind of graduated out of this program? Are they still in operation? Just to look at the data long-term to show the longer-term impact beyond just the year-over-year impact. And then as we're looking at the overall lending activity, so again, because of this program, $3.7 million has been, released as capital into it, with the city buying down $1.2 million in interest throughout the program in those 161 loans, with an average loan of just over $22,000. So, I mean, in small business loans, that's really not that large of a loan, but again, for those small businesses, probably micro businesses, it can have an impact on their ability to grow. So as we look at the outcomes for just FY 2021, so it was a total of 35 loans and $815,000. Again, $250,000 in loans in the interest bought down by the city. 66% of those, full 2/3, were within Equity Atlas scores of 7 or greater. So there's a lot of good there, knowing that those dollars are hitting areas where there's been historic inequities. 120 full-time jobs created and 52 retained. So we also track aspirational goals associated with this program.
It says 120 created and 52 retained.
Sorry.
Is that flip-flop?
Might be going a little bit too fast today.
No, it's okay. I'm going, wait a minute. I'll tell her we're wrong. No problem. Thank you.
So again, looking at those outcomes associated with their aspirational goals. So the first column, you'll see what were the aspirational goals for last year. I'm really happy to report that by and large, we met all of those aspirational goals. Really excited about the veteran-owned business getting 15% exceeding that aspirational goal. Hispanic-owned businesses, again, exceeding their aspirational goals. And so based on those historic actuals, we've actually modified in this year's contract to increase those aspirational goals, because we do want to recognize that where we're exceeding, we should aspire for greater. And so you'll see our updated goals there. So on to the outreach. Again, you know, we work with Lift Fund to market this program, and you'll see, you know, the number of ways we try to market it using both traditional and digital media, working also with, you know, our partners, Women's Business Center, Launch SA, you know, working with different community organizations, as well as our elected officials utilizing their newsletters and different, you know, opportunities. We have, you know, our internal marketing with our text message program, our newsletter that goes out monthly, but also try to work with those traditional lenders so that when they do have a small business owner who's coming in to seek you know, a loan, but perhaps they're not qualified, they need to do that financial work, that they are referring them to Lift Fund and getting them on that track, and additional getting them the loan. So I think that's one area of opportunity to work with those financial institutions to, you know, let them know that we have this program so that it's not a hard no when someone comes in, but no, but here's an opportunity for a program you might want to utilize. Again, just wanted to close with a couple of success stories. We like to highlight these each year. So here we have Yabin Che, and so she is a native of China, particularly in the region where tea is life, essentially. And when she came to the United States, she wanted to share her love and knowledge of tea. And so, you know, found that there was an opportunity here in San Antonio to do so. However, you learned there were challenges with getting her product to market and really having the capital to expand her business. So she connected with Lift Fund and was able to get a loan. Actually found out she is on the path to paying it off. We got an update yesterday on her status, and so we're excited for her and her business moving forward, and the access to the other services available at Lift Fund. And then, since we were just talking about, you know, startups growing, so here's an example of one startup that was able to use the program. So Mr. Rick Narfall, who, you know, he had a great idea one night and said, I want to create a service where Uber technology meets AAA service with roadside assistance. And so he created Mach 1 Services, which is an app. It launched in January 2020, just before COVID. And so while he had put in all this work, working with Launch SA, getting his loan from Lift Fund, immediately with the start of the pandemic, he saw a hit in his business because people weren't traveling as much. So he took the opportunity to remarket his app, to continue to retool, grow, and is doing quite well now. He has successfully paid off his loan. So, you know, this was able to help keep his operations afloat during COVID and give him the opportunity to pivot like everyone else has over the last 2 years. So I'm really excited for both of these small businesses and being able to use the program. So that's a quick overview. Again, for any questions, feedback.
What are the interests?
Anna, who's the lady on the cover? Do you know?
Sorry, real quick. I actually do know her name. Sorry, 1 second, Judy. So this is Susan Gomez Maldonado, and she is the owner of Fiesta Couture in D6, and she participated in 2020.
Thank you.
What's the average percent on these loans?
So typically, Lift Fund interest rates are in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%. So, you know, it can present a barrier for small business owners, but again, they wouldn't otherwise qualify through a traditional lender for various reasons.
Any other questions?
Oh.
Go for it.
Do you know, or I guess, does Lift Fund provide to you as part of their report out the most common referral sources, like specific agencies, businesses?
So we don't collect that data right now, although that's something, it actually came up yesterday during EWDC, and I think something that we recognize also through our ecosystem work, that we need to better track those referrals, those assists, because that's an important stat. So that's something we want to incorporate in to understand who's doing well at getting word out. Yeah,
and that's part of, I think, what you could do to assess. Sorry, Jim. I think that's what you could do to assess, you know, how you might go to folks who have been successful in referring people to this program, right? And speak with them and see if you can garner any knowledge or resource sharing from them that you could then take to other areas and share with other agencies to hopefully boost participation amongst other districts.
Commercial lenders throughout the city and the region, for that matter, refer a lot to Lift Fund and those who have SBA programs. Doesn't necessarily, may not fit the SBA model of that lending organization, but they'll forward those to Lift Fund because they have a wider range of lending ability, underwriting authority. So with those funds.
Yeah, I wonder, you see the representation like in District 2, right? If there's a particular other I always get confused, CFDI, that is in that district, right? Or an organization like SAGE, maybe they're being particularly effective at referring folks.
Correct, yeah.
Is there a way we can change the screen?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
I think I'd like to
Sure.
know, Anna, if the loan interest buy-down program, does this mean that they bought down the 10 to 15% down to a smaller number or to zero?
To zero.
To zero, okay. That's good.
Just because of showing progress, or is there some type of milestones?
So they would go in and apply for a loan with Lift Fund, and so if they're eligible for this program, Lift will work with them. And from day one, their interest is zero, provided. Yeah.
I do have a quick question. This is totally outside the box, but I've been keeping an eye on Bitcoin and other digital currencies, and I've been reading up that businesses are starting to, or companies are starting, these digital companies are starting to do business loans digitally. So I don't know if it's too new of a thing, but I think we need to keep an eye on that. Being these small business advocates, I feel it's the commission's responsibility to keep an eye on this to see where the future is headed.
Sure.
To help them out with that stuff. Because a lot of smaller, really, really micro small businesses, they don't even understand loans that are happening now, but loans that happen in the future, like with Bitcoin and stuff. I can see that being very daunting and scary as well. So if we can be the pioneers in that and help people understand that, I think that is our responsibility. But just thinking outside the box.
I love that topic.
Yeah?
One more clarification. On the loans, I guess the city is providing the buy-down portion of it. The loan funding is still coming from Lift Fund and where they get it donated from other banks and stuff.
Yes, yeah, the principal is coming from Lift.
Okay. And so the 10 to 15% is really high, and so, which means there's less amount of loans going out because of that number. Is there any opportunity for them to reduce that number to get more loans out? The typical lending at the bank is, 3-4%. What can we do to get it even 8%?
Yeah, and I know they had received a grant recently that allowed their rates to go down to 9%. Again, they're dealing with individuals who, for whatever reason, have issues with credit or their financials or even, lack of collateral in a lot of cases. So I think there's a higher risk profile associated with it, which is what ties to their higher rate. So the goal, at least the way I look at it, is to graduate them from that. And there's a number of individuals who they started with a small loan there, which use that to grow their business incrementally to get their next loan, and eventually that snowball effect is they're ready to go to a traditional lender and take advantage of those much, much lower rates. But Lift Fund gives them a point of entry where otherwise they would have been turned away. So I can see your point in terms of trying to help getting their rates lower, but for me, it's how can we graduate them to traditional loans faster too.
Is there any opportunity for creating line of credits for them instead? A $20,000 line of credit through Lift Fund to teach them how to borrow money, use it, pay it back, as a step instead of just saying, here's one loan. But how do we create that, even if they start with $10,000? they graduate to 15, then 20, then eventually a banker.
Yeah, baby loans, so they can build their credit against that.
Something we can definitely talk to about a line of credit. I'm not aware if they do that, and I don't know what limitations they have as a CDFI, but we can see kind of what are other opportunities outside of individually, like.
I do know other CDFIs are doing line of credit.
Okay.
Do we have lift fund come in and speak?
Well, and this is an example, too, of when we've talked about ARPA, for example, we've talked about the full portfolio of, there could be a variety of options. I know those grants is one thing that's talked about, but there may be a variety of portfolio, again, going back to what are some of those needs of some of those maybe longer term programs where maybe it's a pilot program or something that is used based on some of these other CDFIs, stuff like that. So that's why we want to start touching upon some of the data that's out there, some of the, like with the ecosystem presentation excellence and some of these portfolio or some of these other programs out there, because there might be ways to enhance or play off or whatever when we do know what some of the specifics are. Which I do have an update.
I think also the disconnect of not having an actual bank involved, which the relationship doesn't happen, right? And if we make that as part of a requirement so that they have a banker who's talking to them about this, what's available, so that they see the long-term path rather than just the slow.
Right.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to have the lift fund attend, have a discussion with them in a future meeting.
I think we need to really, well, maybe the discussion is later, I don't know about the agenda, but prioritizing what we want briefed on first, what's immediate.
That's what to me, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess with that, let's close out on the loan interest buy-down program, and let's move over to the next agenda item, staff up. Oh, go for it. Okay.
Did anyone have comments?
Oh, yeah. Does anybody have comments left for the buy-down program? Nope. Okay. Staff updates?
All right. So real quickly, speaking of ARPA, that is, the plan is still to present, for staff to present January 26th at a City Council B session. So again, at that meeting, City Council will continue the discussion for the spending framework for those funds. It is anticipated that staff will present draft recommendations for allocation of funds based on those community engagement results and the continued input. So again, as you all know, the feedback from ASAC was provided, all of the comments were provided. Likewise, there were those 8 listening sessions and the SA Speak Up survey and a lot of input. So they've continued to collect all of that, and we'll be providing some recommendations at that. And then it is anticipated that City Council will consider that at the February 3rd. So those 2 dates, again, were what was previously presented. That's still the timeline for that. Workforce was brought up at the previous meeting, so wanted to provide an update about the SA Ready to Work Advisory Board. There is an employer engagement subcommittee, and they are seeking applications for that subcommittee. So the board created the employer engagement subcommittee, we'll just refer to it as the subcommittee from here on out, to broaden the employer voice and to solicit feedback on the SA Ready to Work program, which is, I know, something that was previously discussed here, wanting to do. So that subcommittee, per ordinance and the various articles, cannot be larger than the actual board. Currently, the subcommittee is made up of 4 members, which include Rosa Santana from Santana Group, Dr. Delphine Carson from Edgewood, Ben Peavy from Accenture, and Council Member Manny Pelias, District 8. They are seeking the addition of 5 additional subcommittee members over the next few months, and will be participating in broader industry-focused employer roundtables using the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Talent Pipeline Management, TMP, approach to align those approved training curricula with employer hiring needs. So again, the subcommittee meets on January 26th. So January 26th is a busy day, an important day, to finalize nominations to present to the board on January 27th. So the subcommittee will be meeting monthly going forward in person on the 4th Wednesday of the month from 9 to 10 a.m. At least that's the plan as of right now. So if any SBAC member or your constituents are interested in applying, you are strongly encouraged to do so. And you should contact Romanita Matabarera, I can never say that, by no later than January 21st. And so we can send you application materials following this meeting. So we'll be forwarding that out if you're interested. If you want more information, we can also provide Romanita's contact information so that you have that as well. But that way, there would be that linkage to SBAC and the SA Ready to Work Subcommittee, Employer Engagement Subcommittee as well. Next, I want to touch upon, before we talk about future agenda items, I want to touch upon the meeting schedule. I know there was some conversation about wanting to get this as a regularly scheduled meeting for planning purposes. So in working with our chairperson, we're looking at the second Tuesday of each month, beginning at 10:30. So basically continuing today's cycle going forward. So that means the next SBAC meeting will take place on February 8th. And 2022, which again should align nicely to, we should have some specifics, hopefully after the February 3rd council meeting, for some specific conversations. So again, February 8th, 2022, again, we'll send some information out on the follow-up email. And then the future agenda items, was this handed out?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody should have received a draft proposed agenda item schedule based on the conversation last month and meeting with the chair. As mentioned, we do need to move the meetings from today's meeting to next month, so there will be a number of minutes to review at that. The ARPA-funded conversation as well. We also slated workforce development as well as the small business ecosystem conversation that was brought up actually today. That's that Next Street information and with Ms. Powell. And then you'll see going forward some additional conversations or suggestions based on city schedules. So for example, March 8th, bond election will be in May of 2022. So staff was suggesting that we have a briefing on that 2022 bond, and then the discussion on the construction on small businesses, again, based on feedback that you all provided at the last meeting, trying to kind of calendar that out. But as was just heard, if there's specific items or priorities, by all means, provide that information so that we can adjust. And if something comes up, the schedule's always subject to change based on existing needs. If some issue comes up or, something is presented at city council or something that definitely need to get that involvement. What's not on here, and you'll see on April 12th, was a briefing on the Economic Development Strategic Initiative. We fully anticipate engaging you all, maybe not to be determined how the specific SBAC versus as individuals versus, so there's other opportunities that may not be identified on here as the schedule. So again, more to kind of come on some of that. But
I'd also like to say that this is not a concrete agenda, it's a fluid agenda. So I think that's where the opportunity I would say now is if there are items that need to be added in for February and or March, this is something that we can put in the request. And also, I'd like to ask for a request of the staff to where if once we do have an agenda ready to go, I guess at least 7 to 10 days out, that if we can get that distributed to the commission members, that way it gives them, 3 to 4 business days or so to get back to us on final changes before it goes public. Would that be possible?
Just the proposed agenda?
Just the proposed agenda before the final goes out, because that way there could be something that came up. Everybody good? We can't vote on it, but everybody just good with that? Online?
Well, and I would strongly encourage, staff is working with the chair on developing the schedule, so I would also, strongly encourage as you have things, if you want them, instead of necessarily waiting for that draft agenda too, if you have items that you would like to see that you've heard of or have come up or in a conversation, strongly encourage you to provide that to the chair and to the team so that we can have those discussions as we're building out that agenda as well.
That way, you know, I want everybody to feel like, even if you've been online for a few times, I want you to feel like you have a voice too, that agenda item is in there. So I guess like that, I don't want to open the floor to discussion, but I want to just open to any suggestions on the February 8th agenda. If we have any items to add in there that we've maybe discussed today, maybe around the data request.
So what happened to the items we voted on last meeting?
Yes.
And we also requested 2 meetings in January.
Correct.
And so what happened to that stuff?
Well, that's something we have to figure out.
Well, so when we did put together this proposed agenda, we went back and looked at many of those, or looked at those items discussed and you know, tried to make sure that they either were as an individual item or would fit within the discussion. So again, you know, the small business definitions, that was something was on that list. The discussion with Leila Powell, updates on ARPA, talking about the impact of construction on small businesses. So we did look at that list, and I'm fairly certain that we covered everything or had it, you know, in this potential items that we needed to
I have the list in front of me. So it was how to define a small business. We talked about 38% of businesses for the shutdown. ARPA funds, so that's in there. Talked about subcategories, short-term, long-term, intermediate dollars. I think that's one that has not come up yet.
Well, but that's also included in ARPA conversation.
Okay.
But I think we wanted to have it was a next meeting thing so that we can vote on it as a subcommittee to have that
Correct.
happen. So
Correct.
we can't discuss it anymore, because it's not even on
Well,
the agenda.
we can't even discuss anything today.
Right. But again, it's the point that we're having meetings, we're identifying what we want, again, staff changes it, and then we can't discuss it.
I know, but let's put that on for the 8th, and that way we can ensure we
So we're not having another meeting in January like we requested.
No, well, I guess,
There's no immediate need today.
can we vote? Can we even
No.
vote in the meeting?
The other thing was that we were going to be sent off a doodle for this meeting and the second meeting for January. I never received a doodle.
So this was the only opportunity to meet in January, at the beginning of January, to have a meeting space associated. Typically, these types of commissions, advisory boards, they have a regularly scheduled meeting. That also incorporates the fact that staff has to prepare for these meetings, full information data, secure speakers. So the goal was, as we went through that initial ARPA push that, you know, in this year, that we could get to a more structured meeting with a regularly scheduled date and time, and that we could have an agenda that's built out so that staff has time to do the work and is presenting information that the commission wants. So the greater the frequency of meetings, and we do start bumping up those challenges that, you know, we're unable to secure all of that information. So,
And it's not just the information, it's just even getting a room and just a variety of things. There's a lot of competing interests, but all of that information was taken into consideration and was discussed. So I think and the reason the doodle, for example, wasn't sent out is because we had a previous doodle that had already identified some available, like the best dates and times, so that information was compared to finding a room location and available staff, so that's why that wasn't done. And
However, you made a decision. It was not communicated. And we were understanding that that was the agreement. And that was what's going to be distributed. If that was a decision made by staff, the courtesy would have been at least to communicate that to the rest of the members so that we would not anticipate that doodle coming out, so that we would prepare in providing these dates and times, so that we could submit questions and recommendations on the agenda.
so staff will work with our chair to address your concerns.
I mean, is that my misunderstanding? Because according to the last meeting that we had at City Hall, that a doodle would be communicated. You made a decision that was staff directed towards this commission to execute certain things, and we were not given the opportunity to be able to present those questions and our priorities that were already addressed according to the chair in the meetings that were brought up.
I think the thing our goal was to have something to present for the February 3rd as a recommendation with the dollar amount of immediate needs that needed to be done. And again, all that was like, that's not important, we want to do this. But again, it's not what the commission is requesting, it's what staff is recommending.
Because we don't have a quorum today, can we decide on another meeting? Are we allowed to do that?
According to Anna, this was the only time that was available, but I didn't say y'all was the only time available.
Christina's going to say something.
So I went back and looked, we did communicate on December 23rd that, as we discussed, we were working to schedule the next one based on the expedited timeline, wanting to have wanting to have a meeting in early January and room availability, that the best option was listed below. We did provide that to the commission members for this meeting, yes, ma'am.
And the second meeting for January?
I personally don't recall a discussion on a second January meeting. I could be wrong. We can go back and check that video. Again, most commissions meet, monthly, if at that, that being the greatest frequency.
But that doesn't mean we can't bring one up.
Well, but I don't think, nobody's blaming on us.
Sure.
No. Yeah, absolutely.
I think if anything, also the fact that we don't have meeting minutes that identify what we discussed and agreed on from the last meeting that we expected in this meeting. So it's really hard for us we can't even point to it, right? But again, Chair, with all due respect, you're approving an agenda that does not include the stuff we discussed.
Yep.
And so we have to improve on that as well. Okay?
The other thing, too, is we've already been identified in public. We've already gone to the San Antonio Business Journal that we have not met. So that means that we have to meet more frequently. It's an inconvenience for us, and we understand, and maybe identifying maybe one or two items so that we can get things on, so that, one, it doesn't inconvenience the other business owners and as well as staff and burden the staff, then maybe identifying two major priorities so that we can have that forward movement and not overburden you. Because I understand, y'all have so many other solicitations, reports, impact reports, spot checking and things of that nature that y'all have to produce, not just that, and preparing the other solicitations for surveys. We understand that. But again, this commission is lacking members. That hasn't been filled. We still have how many? 6 still members missing? Is that correct? 4. No, 6.
So there's D1 is still awaiting an appointment, still identifying an appointment. D2 has identified and is scheduling that on council for consideration. And then yesterday, the Economic and Workforce Development Committee set up a subcommittee to interview, to review the 31 applications for the 4 at-large seats. And then those interviews, the EWDC is scheduled to meet February 22nd. And so at that point in time, the subcommittee will have made identified individuals to interview. And then at that February 22nd, again, subject to change, but at that February 22nd meeting, then EWDC would interview those candidates for those at-large and then make that recommendation to City Council. So it would be March before that would go forward, but that is moving, but we are still waiting for D1.
It won't be April before funds are released. Well,
no, that's the appointment.
Yeah.
That's for individuals to serve on SBAC. So that has nothing to do with funds necessarily.
So moving forward, Chair.
Yep. That was a question.
No, recommendations. I just want to make sure that we bring this to our attention because I'm not here to put a check in the box. it was identified and reported that 38% small businesses are no longer in existence. Now, whether that's a true data or not, is still yet to be heard and seen. But the concern is to revitalize our economy. Moving forward, how proactive, how assertive do we need to be to make sure that still remaining small businesses are going to receive the much-needed help? Now, whether it's self-inflicted or not, whether it's lack of education or not, what are we as this commission doing to ensure that that percent, whether it's confirmed or not, doesn't raise higher? And at what point is it critical for our economy?
Yep, I agree. I think with that data that we get, if it's possible, without having to do extra work from staff to be able to pull in information, if we were to create a doodle for another meeting in January that would hold a quorum, then we can continue on to the discussion from this and be able to approve minutes and approve other things and continue. So that way we move into February 3rd, February 8th without any setbacks. Is that possible? Go for it.
If memory serves, January the 26th is the presentation that's going to be done on recommendations for the priorities, correct? Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
So we're not providing any recommendation for January 26th? Because we haven't voted on any.
We need to be able to. What we have voted on are the 5 categories. And
She's talking about funding, about
exactly.
the dollar amount.
Do we have that ability to vote on the allocation of money? Because I thought we were restricted to that.
What do you mean?
We can give a recommendation. We can vote on a recommendation that wants to go forward. That has not happened.
No.
And if we look at this agenda, if I could just get clarification. Sure. When exactly would funding actually go out with this process to small businesses? Would that be in May, June? What are we saying?
Well, so the hope is that on February 3rd, there will be an identification, well, on January 26th and then approved on February 3rd, funding for small businesses. Again, there's over 300 million identified, so there's a number of conversations taking place with council and so forth on that. So that would be identified on February 3rd. The expectation was that that would be in buckets. So again, small business, housing, transportation, whatever the case may be. They've identified those buckets. And then there was the opportunity for then specific recommendations. So within that, for example, mental health is something that has been identified with significant needs. So within mental health, there would be a number of conversations about what programming, what funding. It is a possibility that there would be RFPs. So again, even if in small business a grant is identified as a priority, identifying what that looks like, and then there needs to be, we're still within city purchasing, so there needs to be request for proposals. So depending upon timelines on that and expectations, again, we're still waiting to see what kind of feedback is provided at that January 26th meeting and the February 3rd. So it could be April, May, June.
So for the briefings, maybe we should have received what staff is recommending for this January 26th, and I'm sure you guys are recommending something that we could have maybe given feedback on instead.
So, no, staff, so what is being shown, what is being shared with City Council, and this is something that Veronica had shared previously, was the feedback, again, those community needs, what people had identified at those 8 meetings, the essay speak up, what the small business survey, all of the comments that were provided during the SBAC meetings were recorded and provided as part of that, any documentation that was received, and then the recommendation on the 5 priorities. That is what is helping to define what executive leadership team and folks are taking a look at. So again, they're looking at all of that. There's a lot of priorities that were identified. Also looking at other funding sources, and then other resources, so how can they leverage other resources? So the county, for example, is receiving funding. So how can they use that to maybe leverage dollars, right? Leverage other funding sources. So that is all being taken into consideration, and that is what is being reviewed and considered and will be presented. So that feedback's already been presented at the last meeting that we talked about ARPA in December, and then they're using that to develop based on the funding that remaining funds to make some recommendations to buckets, and that's what City Council is going to be considering. So based on those, they did the different priorities,
So you don't need from us any recommendations?
That's not what council had previously asked for. Now, again, if that's something you all choose to do, that's your prerogative, but that's not what council.
I think it's something we spoke about since October, that we wanted to come up with that number.
I think we're trying to activate this commission to provide support to the small businesses. To this day, we have not been able to do that, right?
Correct.
For numerous reasons. And so, I know we're not allowed to discuss it, but Jesus Christ, when can we actually start doing something that matters? Chair?
Yeah, so if that's the case, can we hold one more meeting? Let's see, do we have time next week? And that way, if we do have a quorum.
It is very important. What do we have to do?
We have to get quorum first. I don't know what the health is of everybody here, that they'd have to be able, how many do we need to have in attendance?
So we need to have 5 people, we need to have 8 people total. And we have 9 total members right now. And we need to have 5 physically present in the room. In addition, we must post an agenda 72 hours before the meeting.
Okay. We can do that.
I mean, do we have a commitment from?
So that's.
What's their feedback? Can they hear us?
Can you guys hear us? I think, so the question is, do we have a commitment that if we can put out a doodle to fix or propose a time next week that we can have a quorum to where at least there's enough people in the room to be able to have discussion. And I think we have some agenda items that we have to knock out by next week.
We can't hear you if you're speaking.
Can you make sure to unmute yourself?
I don't think anyone here on the WebEx is speaking.
Okay, so
I think what we should do is probably send out the doodle poll and see who has availability next week and run with that.
Okay. So I would say for those of y'all online, let's do what we can. I know that we're all trying to get better. I suffered through this for the last 3 weeks, so I'm actually able to talk today. So it's, let's try to get in next week, get that medicine in you, and let's just try to hold a quorum next week.
Just drink it all day long.
Yeah, I've been doing that too. But with that, let's go ahead and propose exactly what would be on that agenda for next week. That way we won't have to worry about that. So the first item would be the allocation, the proposed allocation.
A recommendation.
Or the recommendation.
Maybe the briefing should be what is being presented.
We may not be able to provide that. So, that it is unlikely that staff will be able to provide what is being presented. There's going to be briefing, my understanding is there's going to be briefings with council, and so that will not be available until it's published, or maybe even like the day of the presentation. So, and I confirmed that this morning.
So how are we going to make sure that staff and this commission is on the same page as to the recommendations that are coming out of this commission? Do we have to do it in writing, sign it, and say, insert a copy with your presentation? Or do we send it to our own folks? What do we have to do? I want to make sure we're going to be respectful, right? A process is a process. What is going to be the process we're going to follow so we're not blindsided?
know where this, like, us versus them kind of situation is coming from. So staff is happy to put, if this is something that you all want on an agenda, we will be happy to put that. I think we need, we will work with legal on if you want to make that recommendation. Again, the last time it came up at vote, it was defeated at that conversation, so we'll need to make sure we have some specificity. I'm looking at Christina, because I know when this was last asked for, there was some concern about the language and whatnot, so I think we'll need to work with the chair on understanding, again, what that language looks like, Christina, so that we can allow for that conversation and make sure that we're addressing the needs. There's public comment and whatnot. So again, that's where, so when it had been brought up in December, the action was defeated, and so we'll just make sure we're wording it correctly.
I think it's purposely defeated at that time because.
Well,
It was our first communication.
It was our first communication.
Right, but we have to make sure, and my point wasn't so much, but it was just that then we need to make sure that it's worded and what we're trying to accomplish.
We voted on the last.
Correct.
So maybe we should do what we asked for in the last, the next agenda.
Okay.
So we're not having another discussion. So we're just doing what we asked for.
Okay. Well, the thing is, all of the items that we had in the last ones, there are some items that are in here down the road. But I think more specifically, if we were to have an immediate meeting next week, it would be more specific to.
It's for the recommendation.
It's for the recommendation. Okay. Okay. Was there anything else? Anybody else online?
Would you like us to send our questions and our priorities based on what you provided us, that we recommended?
Please, and actually, once we do meet, you'll be meeting with me and the staff on that. So we'll make sure we're there. But I think if we were to have, if anything, I mean, we don't want to throw everything in there for this meeting next week. We just want to make sure we knock out the things that we want to knock out.
I think that's the one thing that was it really.
Right, emergency relief, not everything else.
Yeah.
Just what are we saying needs to happen?
Okay.
Because, I mean, I agree with referring back to what Anna says. I mean, they are overwhelmed.
Yes.
Right now, we're on a time crunch to get these recommendations in referring to ARPA, and they're on a serious time crunch with data. And I do want to be mindful of that because it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of research. I mean, you're literally going, one by one. But the vote was put up, it was defeated, and then they turned around and we were asked, where's the recommendation? And now, we're on crunch time again, and I definitely want to put EDD in a bad position, but we didn't do our due diligence. We did not do our due diligence.
Sure.
I'm a little unsure on where the pressure is coming from the committee or the commission to provide a recommendation.
So all the recommendations were made in city council in December, right? No, November, when they had the report from Veronica.
Right.
So one of the things was that we asked to put a dollar amount on a recommendation for small businesses. It was recommended that we only identify the priorities. Do not attach a dollar amount. But what was presented was dollar amounts from other organizations. And we had nothing that this commission recommended. It wasn't the pressure that EDD is doing. The pressure is the fact that all these organizations and other industries asked for recommendations. So we as the commission did not put a priority for small and micro businesses.
And I believe it was clarified at that meeting that those were unsolicited requests, not even recommendations. They were unsolicited requests for funding.
Okay.
So, as staff, we have not received direction from council or from the city manager to provide a commission recommendation. So I can understand the feeling or the sentiment that somehow we're behind, but, you know, we are working lockstep with the manager's office in terms of the process and providing them what they need in order to make the recommendation for a bucket from city council. And then from within there, you know, again, working within the process to allocate that bucket based on where the needs are, where the opportunities lie, and trying to balance all of that. And also when the funding will likely be available. The other piece we're up against is, again, funding is coming in 2 tranches. We've gotten the first piece, the $136 million.
Right.
The majority of that has been expended. So the amount that's available for immediate release is very small at this point. And the immediate needs, you know, that have been identified are you know, very high. So the likelihood we would receive funding that could immediately be available and put out there is, we're in a period of uncertainty. So I understand and I'm with the commission in terms of the sense of urgency, and staff will put in the time that we need to make these recommendations. But again, we want to work collaboratively with the commission, because y'all bring in a certain amount of expertise that we will never have. But at the same time, we do bring in, you know, a certain amount of knowledge and information that perhaps isn't available to the commission. So I think while we're with you, and again, we want to present at the next meeting kind of the first element that we would like to implement if and when we do receive funding. We want to present that first piece to you, and then be thoughtful with the remainder and taking in, you know, the collective advice from the small business community, from you, from council, to then come up with a plan for the remaining portion. So I think there's a middle ground there, and again, I just don't want, you know, we have a lot on our plate, but this is a priority for us. You know, when those 38% of small businesses that is being reported are gone, that impacts us too, and we care too. So I just don't want it to be, you know, misconstrued that somehow perhaps that we're dragging our feet or not wanting to collaborate on this.
No, it's not that you're behind. It's that we, the committee members, we're the ones that are not contributing enough, asking enough questions, being able to construct what it is that you're needing. I didn't say that you were behind. Y'all are already burdened, and you're keeping up with that pace. But we, as the commission, because we're still missing members and we're still missing pieces, right?
Half the time we're not able to make quorum. Yeah.
Right. It's not that your office or the city is behind. You're keeping up with the request. We're not keeping up on being able to contribute because of certain limitations, certain things that we're required to follow. That's what I'm saying, and that's why I'm asking for the next meeting, like we agreed to do two, even if it's just to identify just one area. That's my concern.
Well, let's plan to catch up in this, so send out a doodle for next week.
Brenda, what do you think?
So I'm trying to get my head around, so if FastBack is presented $50 million, and this was part of the conversation in the December, I mean, heck, we talk frequently in our office, we want it all, right? So, like, we think it all should go towards small business and economic development. There's no doubt about it. If the commission puts in a recommendation for $50 million, I'm just randomly picking a number, hypothetical. I'm trying to put we've kind of going to what Anna was saying about balancing that, right, and the demands. And when you look at those unsolicited requests, I mean, there's a reason the city did not ask for requests and for specifics, because, well, the county did, and they've received hundreds of requests, and it's a challenge, right? And even the unsolicited represented over $300 million. I mean, way more. And then some of those are increasing. Like originally it was, I think the grant program originally was $12.5 million, and now the number that's being thrown out there is $50 million. So I guess I'm trying to balance, like, if we provide that, the intent behind it, knowing that the council has a very difficult decision. You know, what's the message we're sending with it? It's the urgency, right? So I'm kind of trying to get my head around, is it the dollar amount that we're trying to emphasize necessarily, or is it the urgency?
I think for us, it's following suit what's happening currently. It's culturally in those conversations, even though it's unsolicited. I mean, you're talking even about the needed support for something like, Morgan's Wonderland, where they're talking about allocation of funds, or you're talking about the rent relief. You're talking about 50 million here, 50 million there, 30 million here. I think if anything, even though they are not following the procedure, we need to do those same things too, and to be able to put out a number. And it's part of the process for us to maybe then refine it after that, but we need to throw something out there for them to be able to have something of substance to work from.
Okay. So even to vote yes or no.
Correct.
Because
after
that council meeting we left, I made calls to several councilmen and I said, what are you doing about this 38%? And they said, recommend something so we have, request something. There's no request out there for us to look at. That's when we're saying, okay, there has to be at least an emergency relief package. It could be $5 million. I don't know, whatever it is, but that we're at least saying, this has to happen. Can you reallocate something?
Sure.
Provide support. Christina.
Hey, Christina.
Chair, I was just.
Oh, Christina, go
Yeah, I was just going to ask that if we could wrap up discussion, because we're getting a little too much into ARPA, and that wasn't on the agenda today, so we have to make sure we're just talking about a doodle poll or something to set up, whether it's going to be on the next meeting's agenda. We can't get too much into discussion today.
Okay. So I think with that, like, we have a very defined item for next week. If online, once we do those doodle polls, if there is something for you to work around, please let me know. Let's at least figure out how we can at least get quorum in here, because it'll be a wasted session if we don't. So,
and Chair, to that point, about it may be a wasted session, like Brenda said, we would need to vote first to reconsider the item, because as she mentioned, it was voted against in the last meeting. So even before we decide on a number, we would have to motion to reconsider whether we want to provide a recommendation. So the full board could still decide that maybe it's not a good idea to provide a number. So we would have to have that vote first. So
yes.
Just wanted
and we would start off the meeting. So once we approve the minutes, we'll then start off, after approving the minutes, we'll start off with the meeting to reopen, to reconsider the vote. Question?
Just keep in mind that the doodles cannot go out until they're able to secure a location and a time. Because, like Brenda said, there's so much competition for these locations and times, especially since we also have to have it live. So we have to have that much patience when they send out the doodle. Just be mindful of that for them. Because, I heard you, Brenda, because I know right now we're wanting to get something done, but y'all also have limitations. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, we do have to work with a number of other departments. And to be honest, right now, like the city, just like a lot of organizations, we have a lot of people out ill right now. So the challenge is real some days for just, hearing back. So I appreciate that being highlighted, because we do also have the posting requirement, so we need to make sure we're allowing for enough time. So we are certainly going to do what we can. And
so I guess to summarize, what city will do is look for open space, and then from that create a doodle, and then from that doodle distribute out to the commission on when we can meet. And we're talking next week. That's Monday through Friday, sometime next week.
It'll be latter part of next week because of the 72 hours. So correct. Just to be clear.
Correct. And then if there is a conflict for anybody that's even online, because I know the group here on site will do what they can to make it, but for the group online that's under the weather, let us know if there's something we can work around that, but we just need to make sure that we have quorum. What we'll then do is open up the meeting with approval of the minutes, and if there's any recommendations, I know you had some recommendations on some changes to the minutes, so we'll review that first. After we have the approval of the minutes, we'll then move over to then reconsider the vote on the allocation. Is that correct, Christina? Okay, so we'll reconsider the vote on that, and we'll vote on that, and then once we do that, then we'll open up the floor to discussion on those allocation amounts, and we'll do a vote on that.
And are we gonna identify what we want it to go to
Yeah, so
as emergency?
so I think what we should do is start with the top 5 categories. Getting into the subcategories, that's gonna be like I could see us sitting here for a week straight talking about that.
I don't think it's gonna be that.
But, if anything, let's see how far we get. I'd love to start with those 5 categories and then move down from that into the subcategories. And at least for the first one, allocation of funds, there's some pretty meaty stuff in there.
Yeah.
I know that you'll talk about some edits to the minute, just so that we can make sure that everything kind of is approved, for the next meeting. Maybe y'all can get us those updates by Thursday, close of business, so that we can have it included for the next.
And if you guys didn't hear that, she was saying if you do have a recommendation, for the edit for the minutes, to have those submitted by Thursday. That way, then we can then approve the edited and updated minutes.
Are we gonna get the December 20th minutes or not yet?
We are certainly working on it. Again, we're working on it.
But yes, we'll try to check those out and make sure it's done.
And I just want to highlight, by the way, it is Sam's last meeting with us.
Friday is my last day, so,
What's that?
be working very closely with Anna for kind of future meetings, but I've really had a great opportunity getting to meet each of you, visiting some of you all in person, but, was happy to kind of see the commission grow from the ground up. So I'm happy to see y'all fully seated. I'll be looking out over the next few months.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.
Motion to adjourn?
Are we all good? All right, motion to adjourn the meeting?
Oh, no, we can close it, sorry.
Okay.
Just conclude, sorry.
All right, so the time is now 12:32. We don't have anything to say.
Thank you, Anna.
Yes.